So could I welcome Shintaro Kanaoya to the stage, please? Round of applause for the man.
Hello, my name's Shin, and I'll be talking to you apparently about publishing in Japan. So it's always good to be the first on after lunch. I appreciate anyone that's actually awake. So this is the company I started a couple of years ago. We're probably the smallest publisher in the world, which is kind of an interesting distinction to have. I'm on the left, apparently, and the guy on the right is our Japan manager based in Tokyo. So we started the company really to help indies get out to first Japan, but also other Asian territories as well. Because what we were seeing was a lot of these guys wanted to get out there, making great indie games in the West, but for some reason, found it difficult to do it by themselves, or they wanted to get with a big publisher, but the big local publishers weren't necessarily interested. So we felt like maybe there's an opportunity here. And also, as a long-time gamer, I wanted to see if I could bring stuff from the West that was different from what's already being made in the Asian markets. So that's really what we focused on so far. So does this thing work? There you go. So these are the 8 games we've done so far. We've got, I think, 6 before the end of the calendar year, and we're kind of constantly looking for new titles. And the thing that we really focus on is, like I say, stuff that kind of sticks out on its own, that's different, that's interesting, that we think in some ways represents kind of really good examples of Western indie games. And we want to take them out to Asia. So the one you may have heard of is the one called The Room, which was a big hit in everywhere, really, when it came out. I think it's almost 4 or 5 years ago now. It's a UK studio called Fireproof, and it's an interesting, they're an interesting case in point. They'd done the game, they won best game from Apple, whenever it was, but they just hadn't bothered really with Asia. They'd done an English version, they'd done eFigs languages, but they just hadn't really bothered with Asia. And so we approached them and said, look, we think the game is great, but it's kind of a puzzle mystery game, and there's a lot of words, and no one can solve them. So can you give us a shot? So we did that, and yeah, we've basically done some of these other games. So this is just by way of preamble. Hopefully it's interesting, and so that's kind of our biggest title to date, I guess. And we've also helped other companies through pretty much similar kind of things we do in a publishing capacity, but on a consulting basis. So Space Apes, a studio in London. They just recently released the Transformers RTS, and the Japan launch is coming out next month. So we've helped them with that. We've helped companies like Mag Interactive and Boss Alien, who makes CSR. So we kind of do other stuff behind the scenes beyond publishing. Anyway, so the way I wanted to approach this, by the way, was anyone at PGC Helsinki? You should probably, it's the same talk. Good, I'm glad, that's excellent, because I'm really lazy. I'll do this again, is that right? Yes. Just keep it going. So basically, the way I wanted to approach it, it's going to be less kind of business, commercial, market focus. It's really more about what can you do if you want to think about Japan as a territory. Are there indie developers out here? Are there some of you develop games? Okay, that's cool. So hopefully this will be of some interest to you. And these are really the kind of questions that, in the couple of years, 2-3 years that we've been doing this, the kind of questions we've been asked, and hopefully get this out there and you can think about it for yourself. So the first question is, what's the mobile market like? And the thing I say to people is, it's really big, it's very hard, and it's quite expensive. Now, what that really means is, if you're thinking about top 10, top 20 grossing, all of those are true. But what I want to try and convince you of is that Japan is actually an incredibly broader market than that. Yes, if you want to be those guys at the top, get ready for a pitch battle. But you can have a business and you can have a successful launch over there without necessarily doing all this stuff. So it's a territory that you should consider. So I'm not going to go into this in great detail. You probably know a lot of this stuff. If you don't, then I thoroughly recommend you follow Serkan Toto's Twitter feed. He's a German guy based in Tokyo who just lives and breathes industry stuff in Japan, and he's excellent on this stuff. So basically, I just steal his stuff and I put it on a slide, and I'm actually giving him a shout out for once. So that's good. But yes, it's massive. It's whether it was the biggest market I think 2 years ago. I think it depends on which data point you look at, but it's in there 1, 2, 3. So it's it's absolutely enormous. Monster Strike is the biggest title. Puzzle and Dragons was really the thing that kicked it off a few years ago when it just went nuts. But there's other behemoths as well. So I'm going to skate over that. So why is it so tough? So frankly, Japanese users like Japanese games, and that's kind of been had a pattern for years. I've been in the industry 20 years, and I worked in when I was working at EA in Japan in 2000. I remember looking through the list of top 100 titles that had sold that year. Obviously, this is in console days. Not a single Western title was in there, and that's made me feel great because I worked for EA, so not awesome. And this is the state of things today. So this is the top 20 top grossing titles in Japan, I think from last week. There's 2 titles there. There are non-Japanese titles, like the Netmarble title there, but when you're thinking about Western titles, there's only 2, and they're probably not that unfamiliar to you, Mobile Strike and Game of War. And there's a reason. They do spend and put a lot of effort into not just localizing the game and culturalizing it, but in terms of how they do their marketing as well, their user acquisition. So this is the Game of War. Hopefully you all know Mariah Carey, but they changed the Athena character for Japan with the Japanese model called Ikumi. And she, relatively famous, she won, I think it's called a Miss International competition. She's now kind of a spokeswoman for various things. So they chose her, and she became the poster character for Game of War in Japan. Schwarzenegger was actually an interesting choice globally, because Schwarzenegger's always been popular in Japan. So actually that works incredibly well, because he's been doing, not just through his movies, but Schwarzenegger's been doing Japanese TV ads for years. So he's already got like a funny cultural fan base over there. So actually they didn't really need to do anything for Mobile Strike. But certainly for Game of War, they decided to localize their advertising over there. So this is just a very quick sidebar. I'm not going to spend that long on it, but has anyone heard of this game, Dragon Quest? You have, there's some noise. Okay, so this is, from my point of view, and I'm pretty old now, so from my point of view, this is when everything changed in Japan. So up until now, this is NES, Famicom era type stuff, 8-bit days. Up until then, games were very much arcadey type things. The model came from arcade. Not really a lot of persistence and stuff. Then this came along. I think this came out the same year that Zelda did, insanely, and I think Final Fantasy might have been the year after. This changed everything. So gaming in Japan and Japanese users' appetite for what games were, this is what, for me, did it. And it was an amazing RPG game. It was backed by the fact that the artist who created it was the guy that created Dragon Ball, so he already had a massive kind of fan base. And they just made it a superb game. And I think ever since then, the RPG genre has just dominated in Japan. And not just the genre, but also the mechanics of progression and grinding has just stayed in Japanese gaming for 86, what's that, 30 years ago, which is quite amazing. So why is it expensive? So again, this is going back to, if you're thinking about, it's either top 10 or bust, it's very, very expensive. If you're thinking about doing UA, it's, you know, it's about, I guess it's not that different, I guess, from the West, but to get anywhere up there, you're going to need to spend a huge amount, because the local publishers are already doing that. So you have huge amounts of competition for ad inventory. So, and like I said, Gung Ho really created the formula that dominates. So when they released Puzzle and Dragons, thank you, they got what Japanese users like about that progression and the grind and the mechanic of it, and they matched it together with this, I still think, best-in-class match 3 game, and just created this absolute monster out of it. So, as an indie specifically, or even as a smaller publisher, what should you even bother in Japan? And like I said, if you think if we don't make Puzzle and Dragons numbers, we're not going to bother, then sure, don't bother. It's probably not worth it. If you think that you can do something out there, if it's an interesting market to you, and you can invest some money in it, then I would say it's absolutely worth doing. So my point is, you might not be the breakout hit, but absolutely profitable is absolutely possible. And a question I try to ask people, and this really applies more, I guess, to the smaller indies, is are they making something that stands out? So if you're making a fantasy RPG game that's like 10 other fantasy RPG games, that's tough. Like, how are you differentiating? How are you standing out? If you don't have massive amounts of UA to just drive people in, you need something in the game itself to stand out. And if you're not doing that, then you probably need to rethink what you're doing, certainly in terms of Japan. In terms of what genres do well, if you look at what's in there right now, it's interesting. There's lots of different genres. There's a pinball game, pinball-style combat, which is Monster Strike, match 3 games, rhythm action games, pure RPGs. What most of them have in common is this structure where you have an incredible core experience, whether there is a match 3 game or a quiz game or whatever it is in the center of it, and it has this RPG outer layer. And it's just that going backwards and forwards which creates that incredible compulsion loop, which is where all the monetization lies. And again, I think that goes back to Japan's games DNA that was created by Dragon Quest. It's very, you can trace it all the way back to that. So I think you need to try and think about how you're creating that interaction between the meta and also you have to have something very good, obviously, in the middle. So localization. So I'm going to just, what am I going to say about this? So yes, it's probably worth doing. English speaking, Japan has the worst English speaking record in all of Asia, which is appalling, considering that the Japanese government has for years been spending huge amounts of money sending people from the US, the UK, Canada, Australia to Japan into Japanese secondary schools as native speakers, and the English speaking is still terrible. I don't know why, but it is, it's awful. And they've done pan-Asian tests on this, and yeah, it just doesn't seem to get any better. So yes, you absolutely do need to localize. The thing I beg my developers to do is please don't write more than you need, because if you do, for every word, imagine there's like 10 other languages that you're going to need to do. So if you have the best joke in the world that you think is going to be hilarious, really think about, do you actually need to do it? I get you need to do it for character and flavor and whatever, but unless it's really important, just do me a favor and don't do it, because it's a pain in the ass. Find translators that get you. So I'll come to an example on this in a second. And then the other point that for us is really important is think about the font. I've seen far too many games that come out in Japan from Western developers that are localized. They're fine. But then they'll use the Japanese equivalent of Comic Sans, and the game looks shit. So you need to think about font in terms of not just text, but it's graphical, right? So you need to make sure that you're choosing the right type of stuff for that. So this is an example from a game that we did called The Adventures of Bertram Fiddle. And there's a puzzle in it. You click on this grandfather clock, and the main character says, "My grandfather had a massive clock." Now, this is an English game, Monty Python-esque humor. Basically, it's a dick joke. It's a penis joke. Now, the important thing about this, the reason I keep bringing this up, is because I think it illustrates a couple of really interesting things. So, first of all, it's just a joke. That's all it is. It's one of those objects that you click on, it gets a joke, it gets a laugh, move on. If we hadn't explained that to the translator, or if the translator hadn't got that, they might have just translated it into Japanese as, "My grandfather has a large clock," right? And it's like, well, okay. Not only is it not funny, but then the player's running around thinking, why is that important? What do I need to do to solve this massive clock problem? There isn't one. So we found a translator who helped us. He managed to somehow create a Japanese dick joke, which I'm very proud of, and also get across the fact that it is just a joke. Move on. So it's just a silly example, but localization is really, really important. And if you do it badly, not only does it not get the message across, but you're going to actually really stump players. So it's really, really important just to make sure you get stuff like that right. So obviously art comes up a lot. Do you need to change it? It depends. I would say, the aim for a Western developer trying to get out to Japan is not to try and make the game look Asian manga anime. That if you try and do that, you're competing with everyone else. So one of the competitive advantages you have is you already have a style potentially that differentiates. Now it could be bad, but if it's good, then let's try and dig into that. There are exceptions. So we released this game called Kitty Powers Matchmaker. So the one on the left is the original English version. And it's a dating game. And I really liked it. One of the things I really like about it is it's very, I guess you would say, LGBT friendly. It treats homosexual and heterosexual relationships exactly the same. It doesn't differentiate at all. The developer is actually the guy on the top left. His name's Richard, but he's also a drag queen at the weekend. And so I love this game. And we said, well, let's do this. And we showed it at Tokyo Game Show a couple of years ago. And the big issue we had was people just hated the characters. It wasn't they liked the game, but they just hated. They found them too grotesque. They couldn't get past that. So that's one of the few examples where we've changed the artwork because it was an obstruction to people getting into the game. But broadly speaking, we won't do it because we want to maintain the integrity of the game, the vision of the creator. But when you get clear feedback that they just can't get into it, then you have to do something. Premium or free to play? Well, there's one premium game in the top 200, and that's Minecraft, and that's a cultural phenomenon. So anything with a price tag is hard. So what we've tended to do, we've taken premium games, we've looked at premium games, but one of the things we try to do is if you've got something premium, is there a way to make it free at the point of download? But still, that doesn't mean you then have to make it a grindy, ad-filled, whatever, IAP-ridden free-to-play game, because if it's not designed like that, you certainly shouldn't do it. But there are ways you can at least get people to try the game first. So, old shareware model. So we did that for The Room. You download it for free after Chapter 1, unlock by an IAP and unlock the rest of the game. It's not particularly sophisticated, but the point is just to get people to go into the experience and sense it and play it and experience it before you ask them to pay it. Because with a price tag, they're just not looking at it, and it is what it is. PR or user acquisition, well, it depends very much. I mean, some of the games that we do, so The Room is an example, there's one thing you can buy, which is, I think, $1.99. And if the cost to buy one user is $3, it's probably not worth doing. So for most of our stuff, we rely heavily on PR, and PR in Japan is effective. And we're fortunate in that the games that we've released have actually been covered very broadly. So that's a Let's Play up there from this guy, Max Murai, who's got 1.5 million users, I think. There's another guy down there called Kosuke. So I think, again, if you put stuff out there that's interesting, that's differentiated, the media will pay attention. Obviously, you need to let them know you're doing it. But if you can do that, they will pay attention. So it's obviously a cost-effective way of doing it. The tricky part is obviously getting to them, making sure you write Japanese press releases. But if you can do that, or speak to someone like us, I guess, then it's very effective. So the App Store, yes, obviously you need to change it. If you look at, I should have put doesn't matter. So these are examples of Monster Strike and Puzzle and Dragons. And bear in mind, originally Apple calls these things screenshots. These aren't screenshots. Not a single one of these is what appears in the game. These are pieces of artwork that they've composited. And this has been, prevalent now for a couple of years. And so I would say the last thing you should do is just do a screenshot. Make sure that you're using the screen real estate as much as you can. And in Japan, for whatever reason, density isn't an issue. So you can see the reams of text, and each image will explain a different feature of the game. Think of it, for those of you that used to work in retail games, think of it as the back of the box type thing. What are the bullet points? What is each screenshot trying to show? What are you trying to explain to the player? And so use that as much as possible. So, we did that for the Room. So the original UK version, they literally used screenshots. And that's fine because Apple made them the game of the year and they had enough stuff. But for us, we wanted to make sure that we were showing not just a screenshot per slide, but we wanted to make sure we were showing as much as possible the variety of each game, of each screen. We wanted to make sure that, so if you can see the letter down there, that's fully localized into the language that's relevant for that territory. And again, trying to explain as much as possible without, if this had kind of neon, horrible, fluorescent writing, it would kind of completely break the game, so we didn't do that. But you want to use that screen real estate to explain as much as possible. And I think that's a pretty basic point, but it seems to be more important in Japan than other countries. 1 minute. Okay, so yes, it's really hard. I wish there was a way around that. But like I say, if you think it's top 10 or bust, then probably go home. If you think that you can do something, and if profit's important to you, if making sure that that you have a foothold in the market, that it's important to you, then Japan is by far absolutely accessible. It is accessible. You can do it. You just need to be a little bit smart. You need to know a few little things, but it's not really any harder if you know those things than your local market. Fundamentally, you just need to understand the differences, and that's true with any market fundamentally. I would advise not to design your game for Japan, because that's your differentiator, and you don't want to compete with everyone else out there. It's too hard. Yes, you need to recognize what the monetization models are, but again, I would say don't try and put a square peg in a round hole or whatever it is. Ultimately, you've got to be true to the game that you're making. Prioritize that, and then think about, okay, what are the tweaks we need to make sure we can make it work there. And you know what? Japanese users might just might not like your game. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. It's not like every single Japanese game that comes over here is successful. By far, of course they're not. Puzzle and Dragons took a long time to get any traction over here, and it was going gangbusters in Japan. So yeah, think about localization. Please don't write any dick jokes. That would be helpful. And yeah, localize and reassure users whatever your touch points are with the users, whether it's on the App Store, whether it's in PR. Try and not only just localize, but reassure users that what they're getting is a decent experience, it's safe, it's fun, because there is a certain level of kind of timidity with Japanese consumers, so that's something that you need to try and do if you can. I think that's it. Thank you very much.